Welcome to the Toon Show. I'm your host, MC Toon. I love to have fun promoting science and critical thinking. Often I do this by debating against flat earthers, anti-5G nutters, and other science deniers on my YouTube channel, MC Toon Live. And I also feature pre-recorded videos explaining science in an irreverent way on my Conspiracy Toons channel. Jump onto YouTube and find them there. On this podcast, I feature some of the live debates I've done, as well as podcast-exclusive interviews with Science-y Smarty Pants guys. And today's Science-y Smarty Pants guy is Raynard Wilson. Welcome, Raynard.
Hey, welcome. Welcome me. Thank you for inviting. Thank you for welcoming me to your podcast. That's what I meant to say.
Thank you for being the Science-y Smarty Pants guys for the day. Now, we are here to talk about 5G and probably one of the craziest court cases that has ever existed on this topic. You want to give us a little intro on that?
Yes, today we are going to talk about legal action against 5G. This was a campaign that became a court case that promised to shut down telecommunications in the world's fifth largest economy, the country where I happen to live, the good old United Kingdom. The people behind this campaign, believing that 5G was the cause of their medical and maybe other kinds of woe as well, they got together a bunch of activists, they found some lawyers, and they took this matter to some of the highest courts in the country. And maybe we're going to say what happened. We're going to say what happened over the course of this next hour.
Yes. Well, I've done a few videos on this topic, and this goes right into those. And this case has been going for years, of course. And the person who is on the court side of it, the lawyer, is Lorna Hackett. And then there's a group of concern trolls, sort of, that they're the ones that think that 5G is the cause of their woes and has all sorts of issues with it, even though they can't list off the specific problems with 5G or find out where in the specification it varies from 4G in a way that would cause any particular problems.
Right. I mean, that's always been the problem for these 5G, shall we call them nutters, that they are unable to articulate any clear source of threat. But that doesn't seem to stop them articulating a whole load of other stuff. And this began way back, I think, in the summer of 2020. If you remember, this was the time when we had just entered COVID lockdown. And we had been in lockdown for some time, actually, hadn't we? In this country.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were very concerned about why, for the first time in our lives, we were being locked into our homes. And there were a lot of wild theories circulating around, which is actually how I first came to know you, because one proponent of those wild theories was a man from Gateshead who believed that lampposts were about to incinerate us all. The people in this campaign, the legal action against 5G people, they considered themselves to be maybe the sensible anti-5G activists.
There is a sensible version of them. Well, I would disagree.
Let's say they would put some distance between themselves and some of Mark Steele's more audacious claims.
Yes.
And I think we might sort of take that as a sign of where they're actually coming from, because Mark Steele is a classic conspiracy grifter, whereas the people behind legal action against 5G, I think, are, let's say, just mistaken about some very fundamental science and, unfortunately for them, the aging process of the human body. Because most of these people believe themselves to be victims of electromagnetic hypersensitivity, which is a disease that the World Health Organization describes as entirely psychosomatic. In other words, it's a delusion. It's not an actual clinical or medical disease. You can't contract this. Nobody nobody becomes electrical hypersensitive other than by hearing about this fictional disease and then imagining that you also suffer from it. And that seems to be who these people are. But even with that, there's a very wide spectrum of people in the legal action against 5G umbrella. So there are some people who are utterly convinced that when they turn 60, the signs of the symptoms they experience, such as maybe weakness in the knees, poor loss of vision, decreased ability to hear high-pitched tones, all these things that they are now putting as a caused, or they're now claiming that this is caused by 5G. It really just sounds like aging to me. It's no surprise actually that when you meet some of these people, they are predominantly in their 40s to 60s. Precisely whom you might expect to be feeling
the consequences of aging.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, I'm there. I may look young and beautiful, but I am within that age group now, and I can assure you that there's all sorts of surprises that are just creeping up on me. And I honestly, young people, I wouldn't want you to eventually be me, but eventually you will. And
if you're lucky, you will.
Yeah. If you're yeah, exactly. If you don't take up power sports or
skydiving without a parachute,
kite surfing, any of these sports that might mean you don't reach a ripe old age. But so they are all convinced that electromagnetic radiation in general is the cause of a broad spectrum of health issues. And if you ask them why they believe this, they will cite a number of sources, such as the Electromagnetic Health Trust, the EHT. So that's an organisation formed by a former government epidemiologist called Devra Davis, who promotes the idea that cell phones are a primary causative agent for a whole range of cancers, which it is an idea completely disputed by most cancer research charities. It's really something that only this fringe group of activists promote.
They do at times they try to find some independent studies that support their conclusion, but for the most part they don't. It tends to be significantly higher power than a cell phone can output, or under conditions that aren't really what you ever would experience in normal usage. So they, there's no doubt that any particular substance or exposure to any particular, whatever, will cause problem in high enough magnitude or quantity. But there's limits to how much a cell phone can legally output, and it's significantly underneath all of these potential harm-causing power levels. But they don't seem to really get that. They really want it to be bad in ways that the science just doesn't support.
Yeah, that's some nuance you generally won't hear from these guys. So, ideas such as that different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum might carry different amounts of energy. The idea that there's a really massive range in energy between, let's say, a small handheld radio and the kind of radio you might find on a radar dish, a military installation, and maybe what you get from the sun on a bright sunny day in Minnesota. I've just described a very broad spectrum and a very broad range of powers, and you're not really going to engage with them at that level, because what they're focused on is the idea that, well, somewhere in this spectrum and somewhere in this range of powers is the potential to cause harm, and therefore it's all bad.
Yeah, it all must be. It's their pre-selected conclusion that everything is bad, and so all that they need to do is find enough stuff to convince themselves yet again And them being now convinced, they need to go and spread it to everybody else. Of course, other people would look at the things that convince them and say, "I'm sorry, that wasn't really all that convincing, was it?"
No, and I think from the start of this campaign, they've been dealing with that specific problem, which is that the things that they find personally very convincing are not at all impressive to people who have a scientific background. But let's begin way back in, I think it was summer 2020, when the legal action against 5G just got started. We became aware of it when one of the major Facebook groups, which is called Halt 5G in England and Ireland, sorry, Halt 5G in Great Britain and Ireland, I think is the correct name of it, which is run by a lady called Sally Bear. She is a nutritionist who lives in Clifton, which is a suburb of Bristol, which is a very nice town in the west of England.
Now, I have named her the Queen Bee of concern trolling.
The Queen Bee of 5G concern trolling. And that really is the way she operates, that she finds some kind of detail in the news that she thinks might indicate harm related to 5G or electromagnetic devices, and then amplifies it with a sort of won't somebody think of the children type message, whereby to dispute her is tantamount to say I don't care about kids.
Yeah, how could you possibly disagree with her? She's only doing it because she cares for the kids so much.
And if you disagree with her, or if you promote evidence that is contrary to what she believes is correct, then I think you're only just providing evidence that there is a vast conspiracy to suppress the truth about the dangers of electromagnetic radiation. So we first became aware of this campaign via that Facebook group, which is, I think it's the main group in the UK for all of the non-Mark Steele type 5G truthers. And they began very successfully to raise quite large amounts of money. Maybe not large if you're used to, say, hedge fund balances, but large by the quantities of money that you normally find truthers able to raise. This is seriously big, enough money to engage some actual lawyers, which again isn't something that these people are normally able to do. We're talking about people who the best they can usually do is turn up to some government buildings with incorrectly spelt placards. But now we actually have real lawyers acting on behalf of people who are real nutters. And
did they get spell check in these their boards, their signboards?
Well, I'm not the best person when it comes to spelling, personally, and so I'd probably be the worst person to notice if they did indeed make spelling mistakes. But as far as I can tell, the lawyers who they appointed, a firm called Hackett and Dabbs, and you mentioned the name of one of the lawyers. Her name is Lorna Hackett, who at the time this case started, she was a youngish solicitor. I mean, when I say young, this is a sort of profession where people tend to stick around and they grow in stature as their expertise increases. So you could be considered a fairly young person in this profession in your early 30s, whereas some of the more senior people we'll encounter later are certainly not that young. Anyway, so Lorna Hackett and her firm begin by writing what's called a letter before action to various government departments, threatening all kinds of severe legal action unless they impose a bunch of quite unreasonable things. A moratorium on all installation of 5G phone systems in the UK until some research is done that establishes...
Yeah, they say until proven safe, which of course no thing in all of history has ever been proven safe. Nobody has ever functioned on a proven safe mechanism in order to allow something to get to market. People have drowned to death having water in a dog bowl in their own home. Dog bowls are not proven safe, yet they're still sold. Nothing ever can be.
Yeah.
That's the opposite of what science can do. Science can falsify things, not prove safe something.
So it's a very strange way to begin a legal campaign, especially if what you want is some kind of decisive action. I mean, we could imagine an alternative version of this campaign where instead of halting a major government and industry-backed industrial upgrade, instead of slamming the brakes on industrial policy that had been set decades in advance, what they could have done would be maybe say specifically what they think the problem with 5G is, and try and get just that thing they're worried about tweaked. But I think this is, right from the start, everyone could see this is a testament to their dishonesty, really, that without actually any serious amounts of evidence, it's almost like I'm holding the weakest possible poker hand, and yet I'm playing it as if I've got a royal flush. But you have to admire the sheer chutzpah of the whole campaign, that they actually thought they were going to bring one of the country's major industries to its knees based on such a weak pleading. And at this point, I think there's no point where Lorna Hackett and all the people associated with her were ever in any doubt as to how weak this case was.
They had to know.
I think they were perfectly aware of what the legal standards were to get this through the courts, and I think they were experienced enough lawyers to know that they literally had no chance. I suspect they were also skillful enough lawyers not to mention this to their clients, who I think were looking for lawyers who were true believers and 100% on their side. As we know from dealing with any kind of conspiracy theory person, the minute you start arguing back against them, the minute you start trying to allow some degree of reality to impose upon their arguments, they'll start suspecting you of being part of the conspiracy.
Yes,
too.
you are certainly in on it, because nobody would ever disagree with them because of their, implicit correctness about everything that they believe. Now, it probably, the thing is, to do a little petitioning for the other side, somebody should be able to, if they have the money, to hire a lawyer to present their case, even if the lawyer does or does not agree with a particular case. And I think that the legal systems of the United States and the UK are definitely open to that type of a case. And, if that's the case, then good job to Lorna Hackett for not telling them that their case was doomed to fail, and instead taking it on so that they could go through the machinations of going to court just to get their, whatever the results were, right?
Yeah, I think that's an important point. We don't know what was said in private between this lawyer and her clients, and I think, yes, the same principle does apply, that everybody deserves their day in court, and everyone has a right to, let's say, vociferous legal representation. So you might argue that these lawyers are doing precisely that. However, as the BBC journalist Rory Cellan-Jones noted, Lorna Hackett and her comrade Michael Mansfield QC had a habit of picking up what seemed to be very hopeless cases. And why this would be the case, we can only speculate. But I'm rather inclined to agree with some of your speculation that actually perhaps it really was the hopelessness of some of these cases that drew these lawyers in the first place.
Yes, I suspect that this is an excellent way to fill their billing hours, and since somebody is willing to pay them to push this through court, then they're happy to be the person that will push it through court, knowing full well that it could not possibly happen. And certainly Lorna has several different cases that she's been involved in that were similarly doomed to fail from the start.
Right. We'll link to Rory's article about Lorna and her many bizarre cases in the show notes. I think I'll emphasize, though, that from what I can tell, Lorna has done nothing that is either wrong or illegal or even immoral in this thing. She's just doing what lawyers do. I think, though, we as non-lawyers have every right to be skeptical when a lawyer's portfolio includes such bizarre cases. I don't think there's any harm in pointing that out. So,
if I could say, I likened it to the plot of the producer's movie, where they figured a way to make a musical, and if the musical fails, then the people that contributed money to it don't expect money back. So they intentionally got way more people to donate money or to back it, not donate, than could possibly ever be paid back if it were successful, planning for it to be an absolute failure. To their surprise, the doomed to fail musical was actually a hit success, and then the rest of the movie is them trying to deal with the unwanted success of their musical. In the legal system in the UK, fortunately, a case doomed to fail will fail.
Yeah, I don't think the British court system has the same kind of sense of comedic irony as a Broadway music producer might have. And you've given the game away. Yes, of course. A case brought before the most senior of British courts, in which the case is based on legal arguments and evidence that are both frivolous, is doomed to failure. But let's not give it away entirely, because there might be somebody listening to this podcast who doesn't know how this story ended. Guys, there could be a surprise at the end. Just keep listening, because sometimes the wacky, Dumb and Dumber style heroes of the story do prevail, and that could be what happens here. I think the storyteller in me wants to keep a small amount of suspense. But as you might be surprised to learn, the government were not keen to halt the previous 5 years of 5G infrastructure development just on the say-so of a no-name legal firm operating out of a sort of industrial unit next to a darts equipment supplier somewhere in the suburbs of England. They said they were just going to carry on installing 5G because that was what they had been elected to do, and that was what there was nothing illegal about installing and upgrading telephone infrastructure. So on the 25th of March 2021, Legal Action Against 5G filed a claim against the British government, and it's one of the most bizarre legal documents I've ever read. It's about 100 pages long, and it begins with the sort of normal British court system form that states the nature of the claim and the kind of action they're seeking to bring. It's well worth a read. So anyone who's even, let's say, 10% as invested in legal action against 5G as I am should go and download this from the MC2 website. If you Google search for legal action against 5G and MC2, all as one word, you will find this page that Michael has lovingly pieced together, and I heartily endorse it. He's got all of the court cases, so all of the documents related to this court case, and about the second one you'll find on the page really is this initial pleading. So it's bonkers in so many ways, because for the first time we learnt what it was that they felt was wrong.
So they needed an actual person to claim was harmed.
Yes, so in the British legal system, just like the American system, you can't litigate on the basis of like a theoretical or an imagined harm. The courts aren't there to to solve hypothetical issues. You actually have to come to the court with a harm that you believe you have suffered. So whether it was a case of the campaigners finding lawyers or lawyers finding the campaigners, we don't know quite how they all came together. But what we do know is that by March of 2021, they had some of the key ingredients that you might imagine a court case ought to have. There are 3 plaintiffs, so that's a lovely Latinate word that means the people who are making the complaint. And there's also a portfolio of what they call evidence. These are, we'll get onto that later. But the 3 plaintiffs, I'm actually not going to mention their names because I don't really, in my view, these are people who may have suffered medically for whatever reasons. I don't think it's necessary to cause further embarrassment. But if you are curious who they are, the documents are all there. They're all public domain documents, and you can find out for yourself. But one of them is a lady who once had cancer and went into remission, but then believes that 5G, the 5G radiation, the 5G transmitters in her neighbourhood pose a risk of causing her cancer to
relapse.
To relapse, that's the word, yes. But there's another lady who has described a series of very non-specific medical conditions that sound to me an awful lot like just getting old. And she claims that all of this began at approximately the time when 5G was installed in her neighbourhood. And she points to a specific device that's a few metres away from her basement flat kitchen window, and she believes that's the culprit. And then
was that transmitter even 5G?
Well, I actually went to her house and I introduced myself to her, and as far as I can tell, it wasn't. Near the back of her garden was an underpass that allows pedestrians to cross under one of the sort of a very busy road that leads west out of London. And either side of the underpass, there's a sort of a microwave transmitter link. It's what you might call a point-to-point link that spans a distance of about 3 meters. And so you've got one of these transmitters pointing at, one of these transceivers pointing at another transceiver. Presumably the function of this device is to enable some networking related to the signage and signalling that you have around a busy road. From what I can tell, this thing is not a particularly high power transmitter. We looked up the product, and it appeared to be something like a quarter watt device, if that, because you don't need much power to
go that short distance. Yeah. The important thing is, it does not appear that 5G had been installed in the vicinity of her home at the time.
Oh, I'm not entirely sure, because this was 2021, and the deployment of 5G in London had begun in 2018. Just about everywhere in London is a 5G area now, and most of London probably was back then. So I don't have any reason to dispute that 5G was available in her area, just that none of the transmitters I could see near the house were 5G transmitters. But there were some very curious details in the pleading. For example, the lawyer describes an interview that took place between the lawyer's assistant, and this particular plaintiff, and she recalls touching a window and noticing that it feels hot. Now, on a sunny day even in England, I mean, maybe folks from America perhaps have the wrong idea about what British weather is.
Do you have sunny days?
We actually do have sunny days, and a British summer can be quite balmy, as we say. It's so there are all sorts of reasons that a window in a kitchen could be hot on a sunny day. Perhaps the least plausible of those reasons is that a nearby 5G transmitter is radiating so much heat into the window that it has caused the glass to warm up. I mean, I imagine that if you had radiation powerful enough to warm glass, just think what it might do to human flesh. But
or the trees nearby, or
yes.
the roof of the house, any number of things.
I think that would be something like, if someone had built Starkiller Base just next door to this plaintiff's house, I think we might expect a certain amount of heating. But it seemed like such an odd detail that they put into the pleading without having excluded any number of more plausible reasons why a window might be hot. But the case went, the document is even more bizarre than you might initially suspect, because it includes some aspects of gonzo lawyering, so to speak, where the lawyer becomes part of the story. Because as you'll read in the document, after doing this interview, this lawyer and her assistant both fell suddenly sick. They describe symptoms of, let's say, partial paralysis, a brain fog, feelings of general unwellness. And I was wondering at the time reading this, what other thing that was going around big cities in early 2021 caused those symptoms? And perhaps, if somebody can think of what that is, maybe you could leave it as a comment. For algorithmic reasons, I'm not going to utter its name. But it just seemed to me that the symptoms that she described were almost entirely consistent with a whole range of other things. And so there was a third plaintiff as well, and she was just generally concerned that she worked in a city that just happened to have 5G. So perhaps she was this third one was the least interesting of all. The plaintiffs had sought some medical attention. They sought a doctor by the name of Andrew Tressida. Anyone who followed the very wacky Glastonbury City Council 5G ban case from 2 years previously would know Dr. Tressida as the man who perhaps misdiagnosed a whole load of people in the beautiful city of Glastonbury as suffering from a kind of radiation sickness. Dr. Andrew Tressida was also one of the people who signed on to Glastonbury City Council's proposal that the dangers of 5G should be mollified by the use of magic USB sticks.
Oh.
So it's almost as like if they had gone out to find the person most invested in confirming their fringe point of view. If they had, if they'd gone to Dr. David Icke, they wouldn't have got a more confirmatory opinion than Tressida could have given them. But Tressida is hardly a mainstream figure in British medicine. He's somebody who is quite plainly fringe and only useful to them because he does actually have a medical degree.
It's uncommon for people with medical degrees to put it at risk to go so far out. But I think when they do, the nutters tend to find them.
Yes, and these birds of a feather have truly flocked together. So
what happened with this case from March of 2021?
Well, okay, hold your horses a bit because we don't have a result. The way it works typically in a civil case is in Britain more or less the same as in America. So the defendants make their application to court and they state their case and they offer what they consider to be the evidence, and then they submit that to court, and then the court asks the respondents, or the defendants in this case, to submit something in their defence. And so a few months later, there's a really quite encyclopedic response from the British government. So they hired a very good legal firm who are very experienced at litigating this kind of matter, and what they produced is a thorough debunking of the legal action against 5G case. it's every bit as compelling a read as the complaint, I think. If you're going to read it, it's all at the mctoon.net website. Is it mctoon.org? Sorry. It's all at mctoon's website, is what I should say. And this is, as you might imagine, this is the thing that the court finds a lot more persuasive than legal action against 5G's screed, because they're referring to actual case law. They're pointing out the deficiencies of legal action against 5G's argument. And in a civil court, you just have to show the balance of probability. So neither side has to prove beyond all reasonable doubt, as you might do in a criminal case. They just have to show who on balance of evidence is right. And it will come as no surprise to anybody that at the first hearing they ever have, it'll come as no surprise to anybody that upon reading both the application for the defence and the application by the plaintiffs and the defendant's response, the judge sides with the defendants, the government, and the judge basically says, look, this case is rubbish, and so by June of 2021, the whole thing is denied. So it was an application for judicial review. A judicial review is a process by which a government action could be subject to court scrutiny, and the judge is basically, by rejecting this application, saying, well, there's nothing to argue here. As you can imagine.
So yeah, I imagine then the people that were backing this said, oh well, too bad. Stop donating to the cause, because that will all be wasted money, and let's just go on our merry way, right?
Well, you would imagine wrong if that were your primary thoughts. But I know you know these people much better than that. They announced that they would appeal. So there's various stages of appeal. The first stage is to basically say, no, we really want to have our day in court. We really want to be able to make our arguments in front of an actual judge, because we think that the quality of our arguments will carry the day. And my understanding as a non-lawyer is that the British judicial system really does have a sort of a healthy bias towards giving people their day in court. That even if the judge thinks that on the merits of the written argument, this seems like nonsense, they tend to be very positively predisposed to people having an actual sort of crack of arguing the case in court, because that seems only fair. And that's exactly what did happen a few months later. And unfortunately for legal action against 5G, the judge once again ruled that the kinds of issues they were bringing before the court are unarguable. And that's a phrase that has a very specific meaning in this sort of judicial review law, where, so, we're familiar with various standards of evidence. So if I said that, to prove somebody guilty, they have to be shown to be guilty beyond all reasonable doubt. So that's a very high evidentiary standard. That it means that there are no reasonable arguments that you might have against finding a particular person guilty. You might have a much lower standard of argument, like, say, the preponderance of evidence. It means, well, there's some evidence for and some evidence against, but most of the evidence points towards this side being wrong, so we'll award the case to this side. It's a lower standard. So you might say something being arguable is just about the lowest standard you might imagine in the British legal system. If something is held to be unarguable, it means that your argument makes no sense, or your evidence is not congruent to the argument you're making, or perhaps the claim that you're making has been brought long after some expiration time. It means there's some very clear reason why you cannot make that argument, and therefore don't even waste the court's time. So if something is unarguable, you have not a hope in hell of getting that through the next stage of courts. And so once again, everything in the legal action against 5G case was considered to be unarguable. So they had their day in court and they had lost. So what do you suppose happened next?
So naturally, they would have said, well, people, stop donating money. We will refund all the unbilled time and hang it up and go about your merry way.
Yeah, that would have been an honest thing to do, wouldn't it? You could perhaps consider the judge's words as a sort of harsh chastisement, and maybe reappraise one's strategy. Even if you didn't like 5G phones, perhaps you could find some other strategy that would be more effective. But no, that's not what they did. They told their thousands of scientifically illiterate fans that actually what they're going to do is take the entire matter to the Court of Appeals. So what you call the appeals court, we rather quaintly call Court of Appeals.
Is this a higher Court of Appeals? Because they had appealed the previous case years prior.
Well, so in the previous, so we're still in 2021. They had been denied judicial review based on the documents. They had appealed that denial, or they'd appealed that rejection, which gave them a day in court. When they had their day in court, they were rejected again, and the judge stated that all their arguments were just as unarguable as when he had read them the first time, and you didn't actually need to bring it in front of me, but now you've done it. You know, here's the exact same damn result again. Now, so to actually, in this case, they're appealing it to a higher court. So the Court of Appeal is basically the next higher court in the chain, and it has the power to review whether the lower court's decisions were entirely justified. Now, here's where we've got to hand some kudos to the legal team of legal action against 5G. These lawyers are not stupid. They are not dumb lawyers. They had on their side Michael Mansfield QC, who is a very famous British lawyer, and Lorna Hackett and her team clearly are not dummies, because for this appeal, they managed to find a very obscure bit of European law, which many people are surprised to find still applies in British courts, that although we've left the European Union, we are still bound by certain laws that are enacted by that are enshrined in the European Court of Human Rights. So a particular piece of Italian environmental law that basically said whenever there's a matter of environmental importance, the government is required to disclose the details of these environmental issues with the general public. And Mansfield was able to successfully argue before the Court of Appeals that actually one of the counts that the lower court had ruled was unarguable was actually not entirely unarguable. So it's almost like arguing the court up from a 0 to a 1 out of 10. and that's kind of what you need to have your day in court. So the judge wrote a very clear memorandum saying that, look, having reviewed all the cases, I can confirm all but this one of the original counts is unarguable. But this last count, the count of whether the government fulfilled its duties to communicate the risks of 5G in a sufficiently clear way, well, that and only that is arguable. But then the judge was very clear to point out that nothing outside of this very narrow issue remained arguable. And so with that, legal action against 5G suddenly had a case again. They were able to bring a case back to the administrative court, that's the lower court we were in last year, and in doing so, I bet you can guess what they did next.
Did they push forward?
Yes, they did. I mean, so if you read the Halt 5G in Great Britain and Ireland Facebook group, at the time you would have seen this presented as a heroic and conclusive victory for the campaign, that the the lower court's decision had been overturned, and that they would once again have their day in court, and they would be able to argue this very important matter. I think the way they presented the information, I think if you read the things that the legal action against 5G people posted at the time, knowing what I just said, you would realize that they wrote it in a way that was technically the truth, but they also wrote it in a way that someone who perhaps didn't have this knowledge might get very easily confused. It might get their hopes up in such a way that they think that actually the broader goals of the campaign and the court case remained the same. And I think it's a testament to just how difficult some of these legal issues are, that I think most of the people who still continued to support this both morally and financially had no idea that the case had been so vastly diminished.
But still, they pushed on.
They pushed on.
And they continued to get donations.
Yep, so we're now towards the end of 2021, and they had by this time raised about £130,000, which is a lot of money, given that all they've had to do is a bunch of hearings, and I suspect that they haven't engaged that many solicitors to write their documents. Most of the legal work were probably being done by the plaintiffs and their friends. So in terms of, from what I can tell, most of this money is just going to the lawyers. Good, it's nice for them.
Okay, good job finding a way to make money in a tough economy.
Yeah. It's nice work if you can get it. So how it generally works is that upon returning this case to the lower court, the lower court judge takes over once again and starts issuing direction orders. So the judge basically is arranging how this case is going to be pled by both sides, or how this case is going to be pleaded by both sides, and what documents are going to be required. So the judge ordered legal action against 5G to produce an entirely new pleading that would address only the very narrow set of issues that were described as being arguable by the Court of Appeals.
And this is specifically that the government must reveal any potential risks is the last thread that they're tugging on.
Yeah,
here,
that's the gist of it. That if it's an environmental issue, so you could imagine something. Let's say there's a factory that the government has allowed somebody to open near a village with a quaint fishing river. That the government would be under obligations to reveal the nature of let's say the polluting emissions from that factory,
yeah,
and what they knew about its likely impact on the water system. So it's
forcing the government to reveal information.
Well, if there is
all that they can do at this point, right? This isn't a thing that would stop anything from being deployed. It would just say, well, you need to tell us about the what you know about the health or the environmental risks.
Well, let's put it even more narrowly, that if there was a known environmental risk, then the government would be obliged to disclose that information.
Yes.
But if the considered opinion of the government was that there is no no risk, then I don't think they'd be obliged to disclose anything. So
yes.
I think you could perhaps put it the other way around. If 5G was an environmental issue, and if 5G had some kind of known health impact, then arguably the government would be required to disclose that. So what the judge ordered the campaigners to do was now redraft their documents, their pleading, to narrowly focus on that particular issue. Let's play Michael Toon's guessing game once again. Do you think they did that? Yes or no?
That exact thing?
Yeah,
I'm going to guess. I'm going to guess that they did not follow those rules and instead took a much broader approach.
Yeah, perfectly right. That's you know my audience. The document they submitted in response to this order was pretty much identical to their original pleading, even including all the bizarre stories, the lawyer who mysteriously gets sick for 2 weeks because of some mysterious phenomenon which we shall not describe, the warm window, the lady who thinks that she might get cancer again. It was all still in there.
So rather than inform the court about the information that they thought the government was privy to and they did not reveal, which was the specific instructions, they went completely off course and ignored that altogether?
Well, I think they ordered the specific instructions from the judge about what it was they would be allowed to plead in court. And I think that speaks to the shared delusion that all of these activists have. It's that they believe that science is so much on their side, any direction from the court or a judge, no matter how august or important this judge is, they don't believe anybody, not any of these experts that they're dealing with, know what they're talking, because they're so 100% convinced of the righteousness of their own cause.
And probably they, in their own minds, everybody that stands against them has already been bought off and is already in on it, whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, the judges, the opposition lawyers, the government ministers that they're suing, all of these people are part of an establishment who presumably have some kind of vested interest in frying the brains of small children and giving everyone cancer.
And themselves, of course, because they are subject to the same radiation as everybody else.
I imagine so, but
there's nobody living in London or any other 5G area that wouldn't be affected by it themselves. So I don't know how they could be in on it knowingly and somehow not get harmed in the ways that the nutters think they're going to be harmed.
I mean, particularly, yes, if you happen to work in Westminster, where all of the Houses of Parliament are, that's one of the most dense areas, at least from a telecommunications point of view. So that's where something like 5G is most needed. But no, that argument I don't think has ever truly occurred to them, or if it has, they've got a way of dismissing it that I'm as yet not aware of. But let's sort of kind of we're getting very close to the end of the story here now. So the government, in response to this barely modified pleading from Legal Action Against 5G, pointed out that the campaigners had failed to do what they were ordered to do, and that actually there was really nothing in writing that they could specifically respond to that was germane to the only points that the court had directed them to address. So there was no case, at least not in writing, for the government to answer to, which kind of leads on to the final stage of this process, which is that Legal Action Against 5G did ultimately get a hearing. They did get their day in court in which they were permitted to argue this one specific issue. It was supposed to be in January of 2023, but unfortunately that was a day that there was some kind of transport problem in London, and it was a snowy day, and apparently Michael Mansfield, who is 73 years old, managed to slip and injure his hip, so he was unable to attend the court that day, but he was sufficiently healed up by late February of this year, and all of the Legal Action Against 5G people, they made it to court, their lawyers were present, and they had their opportunity to offer, to argue this one final point. And so they all turned up to the Royal Courts of Justice. There was a crowd of what seemed to me about 30 protesters, all waving placards, denouncing the evil of 5G.
Were they spelled correctly?
Well, at least the ones that I was able to see were all spelt correctly. Again, I'm not an authority on spelling, which might undermine my credibility. And this is why I could never be a lawyer. But the day came and went, and legal action against 5G and their supporters eventually went home, and they waited. And Judge Stacey presumably read and cogitated upon the arguments that had been brought before her. And about a month later, in early March of 2023, this judge issued her ruling. And one last guess. Did legal action against 5G win or lose?
I'm going to guess that they lost.
You are also bang on. They lost. And basically the judge said that much of what they argued was entirely irrelevant. But what they did argue did not prove anything much. The judge was sympathetic to the fact that mysterious diseases cause distress in excess of the pain and misery of just having a disease. But at no point had they been able to offer sufficient evidence that linked 5G to the cause of their illness. In other words, they just hadn't proved that whatever they were suffering from was anything at all to do with 5G or radio frequency radiation in general. And in other words, that this entire line of pleading was considered utterly irrelevant. But then
did they also, if I recall, mention that 5G wasn't different than 4G in essence, and that there isn't any different environmental concern to 5G than to 4G or previous?
Yeah, that was a very important part of it. And that's the certain thing. If you want to trigger an anti-5G activist, just tell them that 5G and 4G are basically the same thing, which of course they are. That basically there's nothing fundamentally different from a low-level radio frequency perspective that differentiates 5G from 4G. If anything, 5G transmits on a lower power level, and the key the differentiating feature are the computer systems in the phones and in the cabinets at the foot of the mast that allow these transmitters to hold more conversations simultaneously. But they're not all that different, are they?
No.
But then I think there was let's say the most damning thing that this judge said was that on the point of communicating environmental issues, that she pointed out that the activists had their own preferred set of scientists, but the government was entirely entitled to choose whichever scientist it thought was credible. And that the activists, even if this obscure European law held that the government had to disclose risks, it didn't give these plaintiffs the right to superimpose their scientific worldview on top of that of the government science experts. And the government analogized that to, imagine if the government were forced to disclose the views on vaccines of Dr. Andrew Wakefield. That would be absurd, wouldn't it? Because his views have been discredited. They're not supported by the majority of medical scientists. And therefore...
Or more importantly, not supported by actual science.
Exactly. And so why then would the views of the tiny minority of scientists who think 5G is dangerous be something that was forced upon the government? The judge was entirely unpersuaded. And so with that decision, all of legal action against 5G's case fell. There was literally nothing else left to plead. And so their 1.5 days in court and the 2 years prior to that came to nothing.
So then in their communication to the general population of the 5G nutters, legal action against 5G certainly this time said, well, we had our day, we did our best, we're going to pack it up and go home, and everybody, you just go on your merry way.
Yeah, this would be a great time to apologise, wouldn't it? If they had had a sort of, let's say, a sort of a moral platform, or let's say, if they had a sense of moral self-awareness that might allow them to scrutinise their statements and actions over the last 2 years and reflect upon whether that was time well spent. You could imagine a slightly different bunch of people doing precisely that. But as I'm sure everyone is guessing, that is not what they did.
No.
Actually, what they did was complain bitterly that the judge was biased against them, that the judge had failed to comprehend the science, was an establishment goon who was clearly against them from the start. But then, just as, it reminded me of watching the yeast froth in my sourdough starter. New conspiracies were starting to boil up and evolve, just as the old conspiracies were shot down. And so I enjoyed reading the Halt 5G in Great Britain and Ireland Facebook group. Sally was cooking up a whole load of new dreamy confections that were intended to amuse and distract her audience. New stories like 5G causes oxidation. I think she might have meant to say oxidative stress.
Yes.
But that's still equally a nonsensical thing. One I saw just yesterday, a confirmation of a study by way of the Electromagnetic Health Trust, Deborah Davis again, confirming, Swedish research study confirms that 5G causes something called microwave syndrome.
Ooh, that's
a
new.
disease I'd never even heard of. So I suspect that this is now the evolution of what may have been previously called
electrosensitivity.
Electromagnetic hypersensitivity is now microwave syndrome. So it's just as the terms of the old debate are ruled ridiculous, we can see in almost real time the concepts and the framing of this argument are already starting to shift, and it's only been days since they were ruled out of court,
For reference, they came down with their announcement March 12 of 2023. Today is March 27 of 2023. Not only is the pledge link still up, but they have received money since they announced the failure of their case.
It's astonishing that actually this is upside down bizarro world, isn't it? That somehow the total loss through 2 years of court wrangling is now seen as evidence that they should plough more money into this this bizarre scheme. But I don't think we'll remember, this isn't actually the first 5G court case. There was one that concluded in 2021 by was it Jessica Learmont-Serki, who made very similar pleadings, and this case actually references in its conclusion as just, the court is well aware that this is one in a series of preposterous and outrageous court cases with very little scientific basis. We also had Mark Steele and Kate Chemirani's court case the year before that, which also went absolutely nowhere. So I think if we were to extrapolate on from a sample of 3, I would expect we'll probably see another legal action next year based on some equal. If I'm going to be a betting man, it will be a case about proximity of cell phone masts to schools. I think that's
certainly. That's the straw that they are now grasping at.
Yeah, they're absolutely adamant that the tinies are suffering, and this is where and actually they have if you look at how the movement as a whole has been successful, perhaps one of the few kinds of success they've had is where they've challenged local authorities who have the decision over what construction and where telephone companies are allowed to build towers.
And it mostly comes down to aesthetics when they have success.
If somebody puts a tower and it looks ugly and it sticks above the tree line in a particularly unsightly way, that's a legitimate thing that they could complain about. And I think it's fair, because surely it's down to the local communities to decide amongst themselves whether you can have a choice between tree lines that are more attractive because they don't have towers, but then you might also have to pay the price that your phones don't work reliably. And I think eventually these communities will come to a decision amongst themselves of what they value. And but what they can't get out of planning is they can't stop the phone companies upgrading existing masts. So if you have a 4G or a 3G mast, of which there are still a bunch in the country, the phone companies will want to replace them with more modern equipment, because it runs on
they can swap out antennas or potentially add more antennas to an existing mast, which, if that's the case, makes them look a bit more unsightly. But they're already there, and it's not something you can just
don't need planning
get rid
permission
of
for that, do you?
Yeah,
exactly. So what you tend to find is, at least near where I live, there are now some very elaborate masts. Not that anyone in London seems to give a damn about the expansion of 5G. I think Londoners typically are far more concerned about, let's say, low data rates, since if there's any kind of pollution or excessive radiation, I'm afraid it's already here. So I don't think you'll get this. You won't get that many Londoners too upset. And the things we're exposed to on a daily basis are probably, well, when I die and they look inside my lungs, it'll probably be a sort of black slurry of mouse droppings and just diesel soot.
And how did this Q-tip get in here?
Oh my God, yeah. That's I need to kick that habit. So there you have it, Michael. That's legal action against 5G. 2 years in the making. Absolutely nothing to show for their money, other than, let's say, a few chuckles that we've all had along the way.
Well, I'm sure that Lorna Hackett and Michael Mansfield QC, and now KC, as I understand it, since it's a
He's now a King's Counsel, yes.
King's Counsel. They have enjoyed the billing hours that they enjoy, and good for them. I'm all in favor of capitalism. Go ahead.
As much as I'd like to fault them, I'm sure that if they hadn't offered to take this case, some other lawyer would have done.
Yes.
I think it's just that they seem to make such a specialty of taking on these seemingly quite bizarre cases.
Doomed to fail.
That it becomes a little bit noteworthy that perhaps they have this reputation for taking on cases that maybe other lawyers would want to keep some distance from. And it's on them how they decide how that ought to affect their reputation or not, I think.
Yeah, and at some point, if they have a reputation for being the ones that'll take the hopeless cases, just in case it might one of these times make it, then
it's a 1,000,000 to 1 shot. It just might make it. Yes.
So you're saying I've got a chance?
You've got a chance.
Well, thank you, Raynard. It has been a roller coaster for them, and watching them ride it has been entertaining for us. I am working on a video on my own channel summarizing this latest development, so be looking for that on Conspiracy Tunes. No doubt this is not the final chapter. I do not think that they are wrapping it up and encouraging everybody to go on their merry way. So when the next chapter opens up, I will be covering that, and looking forward to your responses on that, Raynard.
I'll be there. I'll be here, watching eagle-eyed as soon as those delightful 5G nutters make their way back to court. I'll be there, standing outside the Royal Courts of Justice, interviewing them and genuinely trying to figure out what's going on in their goofy brains.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. If you want to see this podcast on YouTube, you can find it at Toon Show on YouTube. And if you like this podcast and want to support it, head over to patreon.com/mctoon. We'll see you next time.